Topic 2. Louis Vuitton and other high-end retailers were raided by a mob. This was a crime targeting the most wealthy outlets in the nation. A nation that features a tattered safety net that many fall through. A nation that has seen a drastic rise in deaths of despair. So, should the public look at crimes targeting the wealthy and the powerful in the same light as crimes targeting the poor? What if those crimes benefited the rest of the society by either redistributing goods or stopping destructive environmental practice, for example? Should a real-life Robin Hood be celebrated? And again, thank you for Counterpoints for helping put this all together. Love the support, love the help. All right, let's start off with Mad Latin.
I'm going to answer with no to the Robin Hood and then build the rest of my opening statement to wrap up the last topic. I just want to say that January 6th was a premeditated insurrection against the legal precedents established to transfer power in the United States to benefit a specific political party and president. It might be comparable to Chaz, but it was infinitely worse and clearly a reason why we should not let Proud Boys and others be considered a official militia that's trying to, protect us. But yeah, no to the Robin Hooding thing. I don't think that actually benefits anyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chaz is pretty dumb though.
Nefarious.
So I just want to say that the Robin Hood thing is kind of weird. I mean, redistribution policies and stuff like that should be carried out, ironically again, through a central organization such as the government. The onus shouldn't be on an individual to carry out these policies and stuff like that. Also, I just want to address what Fanatic was saying. Just because government is failing you currently doesn't mean that you just say fuck the government. I've studied organizations such as the Black Panther Party extensively for a long time, and I understand that in certain environments you are forced to act on your own and from outside of the system. This doesn't mean that you just say fuck democracy and fuck any action within the system. Black people have been incredibly disenfranchised throughout the history of the US, and even currently are disenfranchised to a certain extent. But that does not mean that you can't operate from within the system and try to fix the system.
Gotcha. A counter.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because obviously we're in a time of increased political polarization and also kind of excuses for why shitty behavior should be tolerated because it's moral even if it's illegal, basically. And my frustration with this thing is that basically no, I don't think we should be able to do Robin Hood shit. I don't think we should proverbially eat the rich or whatever. But I also think the rich should be on notice. COVID has hit people super hard. The way our economy has been hit has been super hard, and it seems like they're asleep at the wheel. So they're looking at a population that has taken severe hits to their wealth. I've heard it described as a K-shaped economy, meaning that people who have tech skills that are valued by society, their wages are skyrocketing, whereas people who have skills that are not valued by society, they're basically cratering or staying stagnant. And so I would see the raiding of the store and the excusing of that crime by people on social media as basically signs that we're in a bad position culturally and we need to fix it. So yeah, I'll leave that for the open.
Spectre.
No, everything that Connor just said. I don't think that we should necessarily celebrate it as the yay Robin Hood meme, but the rich should be on fucking notice, dude. They didn't do much to fix the problems that COVID caused. There's certain areas of the country that they haven't done anything to fix the problems of for well over 100 years that they've been saying they get to, Appalachia, different parts of the South, inner cities out on the coast, right? So when this kind of thing happens, I feel bad for the business. I feel bad for the businesses already due to the fact that when they took away our unemployment here in Texas, for example, they lost $3 million just stripped out of the economy. And that's what this gets back to. They kind of mentioned in the question, right? The tattered safety nets. We don't have anything to actually put money back into the economy right now in a place where it has velocity, where it actually goes up to the top from the bottom and helps everybody out. We just, keep on writing fucking checks to banks and wonder why this happens.
Rob.
So I agree with everyone as far as the note of the Robin Hood thing, but let's get into the detail a little more. First, January 6th is being blown massively out of proportion to be used to have a domestic war on terrorism, just the answer. Second, I agree with Fanatic that there was a difference between BLM and Antifa, but both engaged in violence, even though they're separate groups. There were left-wing violence that occurred in both those. Now, to this topic, more specific issues that I want to talk about. Does anyone find it ironic that the question mentions the sprawl of tattered safety nets as possibly a justification for what's going on, and yet Louis Vuitton is in a place that has the biggest safety net governmentally, right? Does anyone think that's a coincidence? They have the most socialist policies in places like San Francisco and California, so they have these big safety nets, bigger safety nets, and yet poverty is still existing. The reality is it's more than just saying a safety net. Like, there's a lot of things that goes in to making people economically successful and making people so they're not in desperate situations and things like that. And the only other thing I'll say right now at the beginning of this topic is, like, be careful what you're wishing for. Like, the idea that this is somehow punishing the rich because it's Louis Vuitton. Much of this, what ends up happening in the name of people that think that these sort of things, which no one said it's good, but that defend this or downplay it, is what happens is a lot of places, and not just Louis Vuitton, but places like Target or mom and pop gas stations and things like that, the same sort of thing hits them as well. And then what ends up happening is all of these retailers leave these places, and then it's poor people that suffer the most because they don't have jobs close to them, they don't have retailers close to them, etc. So this is a reason to sort of reject this. And look, being wealthy itself is not immoral. Oftentimes the people that want to say, well, the rich deserve it, what they really mean is the people that have slightly more money than me. Because I'll bet, I'm just guessing, I'm betting all 9 of us here, by the world standard and by the history of the world, would be considered very, very rich, all 9 of us. And yet we wouldn't say that that wealth is somehow immoral and we could justify people robbing us and things like that.
I agree. My yachts, I think, have nothing to do with anything. They've never hurt anyone. And the fact that some people get jealous about that, and I just don't understand it. Like, get back to your
Me neither.
Holes. Yeah. Back to your hovels. But okay. And I want to try to reorient this a little bit because people are focusing too much on the Louis Vuitton thing. Louis Vuitton thing was just like a jumping off point. I more want to focus on that second half when I was talking about crimes that redistribute wealth, or keep an environmental disaster from happening, right? Like crimes by people who are powerful. Actions by people who are powerful. And then, like, the public responding in the face of a government that doesn't seem to be able to do so. So, yeah, that's like, so let's not focus too much on Louis Vuitton. Like, that part's just inspiration. Go ahead, Fanatic.
Oof, okay. New topic. I'm not going to even address all those other stupid statements that were thrown at me during this open. Yeah. So ultimately, I think, we obviously recognize that, like, crime against the wealthy are never going to be something that we cherish, never something that we celebrate, right? Like, it's obviously going to be problematic. What that would do is end up degrading the justice system and just our idea of justice, such that it would create so much negative utility, so much more negative utility than any sort of benefits that would be gotten in sort of some sort of redistribution, like from ill-gotten gains, right? I think that's obviously going to be super problematic. I think justice has to be equitable. Like, that's a given. And then let me see, what else did I write? The wealthy are able to recover significantly with much more facility than, like, the non-wealthy. So we should obviously focus on people who are going to be, like, negatively impacted more by, like, whatever the negative things that we're talking about here. In a nutshell, I just don't think there's any benefit in, like, celebrating those kind of things. I think we should probably all recognize that just injustice is an injustice, and yeah, that's that.
Okay, Pan.
Yeah, so like Rob, I have a little bit of problem with the framing of this question. Just because the direct victims of the crime are wealthy doesn't mean that this crimes against the rich don't ultimately harm the poor. If we take a look at San Francisco and California in general, a lot of their laws on stealing and stuff has caused a lot of businesses to decide to leave. I think there's like 22 Walgreens that had shoplifting rates so high that they basically just closed down the store. And ultimately what happens when these stores close down is, well, poor people are hurt because, first of all, they can't buy stuff there anymore. They can't gain benefits from buying stuff there. They can't have jobs, any of that stuff. So I kind of, first of all, I reject the notion that you can limit the negative externalities of crimes against the rich to the rich. If we're talking about someone who's poor stealing a loaf of bread from the rich, okay, yeah, that's okay. I mean, obviously, in some circumstances, if you make it so that the rich person is so rich and the poor person is taking so little and it's just to survive, obviously that's going to be justified. But the vast majority of these so-called Robin Hood crimes that we're talking about do not, benefit the poor. They benefit the thief. And the poor people are the ones who get hurt as well. As Fanatic said, the rich people can shrug off these losses. So even then, I would say the primary people that get hurt from this isn't the rich people who can shrug off the fact that they lost a Louis Vuitton bag. It's the poor people who now, because of higher crime areas, have businesses leaving the area and becoming poorer and poorer. So if you can make it so that all of the negative externalities against the poor people, go away, then maybe it's justifiable. But unfortunately, in the real world, you can't isolate those externalities. So it's never going to be okay. Well, not never, as I said with the bread, but you get my point. Hyperbole.
I actually agree with everything Pan said, and just kind of hammer the point a little bit. So there was like this big article a while back, last year during the George Floyd riots, protests, whatever you want to call it. At the height of which like lefties were, I don't want to say all lefties, but a lot of lefties were justifying the violence, saying, it's just Target. Oh, boo-hoo, they're going to burn down a Target, yada, yada, right? Target closed in, I think, almost like 200 stores across the country when all that was going on. Each one of the stores employs 150 to 200 people, right? So like tens of thousands of people across this country who are probably like lower class because they're working at fucking Target, were out of a job for months because people were saying boo-hoo, it's just a Target, yada yada, and I think it was totally fine to go and do that. So just to hammer the point, and I agree with everything Pan says, so I'm not going to go through it again, but yeah, that's my position.
Sure.
So just to get into this, I just want to talk about the safety nets that are currently not like helping us. So like our safety nets are designed to, like, it seems like our safety nets are designed not to help us specifically, but to stabilize the failings of like, the late stage capitalism that we're experiencing right now. We do need better safety nets, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to it doesn't mean that the safety nets that exist are like inherently the problem. Like if you look at, like, for example, the 2008 bank bailouts, these bailouts were directed to the banks rather than the people who are in debt to the banks. And if we actually directed the money there, then maybe everybody would have benefited, right? The banks would have gotten paid, and then the people who are in debt wouldn't have suffered foreclosures, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can see it again in like how our COVID unemployment bonuses are being our COVID unemployment bonuses are actually being withheld by governments to compel us to go back to work for those already low wages that we've all been able to enjoy, and the higher risk now associated with COVID. I do think there's a major realignment going in our favor, so we're like looking to make a lot more money by holding out and negotiating. But like we still have a culture of corporate waste. Like there's when folks work at like watch store, I can't remember the name of this store, but I remember like going behind the store, hanging out with a friend or whatever, and they were literally cutting $200 pieces of merchandise so that they couldn't be dumpster dived later. Yeah. So like they're like destroying products with the intent of not allowing these products to be reused, or like Bed Bath & Beyond, like spray painting bedding so that people wouldn't use it. So I think like there needs to be a major reassessment of like what is acceptable in terms of capitalism. Also, I just wanted to add real quick, January 6th is not being blown out of proportion. It was a direct attack on democracy in a worse sense than that of the Brooks Brothers riot, which decided who would be president in 2000 and coordinated by the same person, Roger Stone. These attacks will continue. As a result, we should not understate the threat. Okay.
Why didn't the FBI find that out?
No, we're not talking about the January 6th.
You're supposed to talk about it some other
This is anyways, my question on this topic is, seeing as how it seems we're unanimous that this sort of behavior is bad, do you fault prosecutors in places like San Francisco for not charging the people that are looting? Do you think that they need harsher penalties for these people that are doing these things?
So institutional
I want you to answer that question, but like again, you guys have been focused too hard on this one fucking story. It's not the important part, right? So for instance, if like we had like a hacking attack or something at a company that was polluting, right? Like polluting a river or something, right? Like government regulations, or at least aren't being put in place, or they're not being followed, right? Like let's say they own the government, and then like you do a hacking attack, you literally stop the polluting, stop the poisoning of the environment itself, right? It's something like that against the powerful. Is that something to be celebrated, right? And this is all in the face of an unresponsive or uncaring government. Like, do we want that?
So it depends on the institutional recourse, right? Like, if there's no institutional recourse, if we have no way of actually preventing the pollution, if we have no way of like addressing our grievances, if there's no way to prevent company X from poisoning millions of Americans, then there is an argument for the recourse of the vigilante. The problem, this ties directly back into our militia conversation, is like that this a thing is very subjective. Deciding whether a company deserves to be punished or a company should be attacked, et cetera, is very, very based on like, you know, your own personal affirmations and beliefs, and it will clash directly with almost everyone else on some level. So it's definitely a dangerous line to cross, I think.
I totally agree. I agree with that. Like, again, this is why I think that violence in the name of politics today is unacceptable on any issue that I've seen. Period. I don't care if you believe the system's systemically racist or if you believe that the election was stolen. None of that justifies using violence, and that would go to show that it also doesn't justify sort of extrajudicial attacks on people's wealth through theft and other things like that. It doesn't. Nothing we see justifies that. Is there a hypothetical case for something like that in the future? Could be, sure. But the problem is, as soon as you say, well, yeah, there are times that that's justified, the very next step is everyone saying, oh, and my cause is one of those. My cause is so important that, yes, it justifies, and we see this all the time, right? If you say, is it okay to punch a Nazi? People will be like, sure, it's okay to punch a Nazi. And then they say, okay, everyone I disagree with is a Nazi. Or is it okay to, you know, what I deal with this with people on the right, many of like maybe type militia people that we were talking about before. They'll say, sometimes the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed with the blood of tyrants. Yeah, but only on your issue, right? Not if the left wants to do it. If the left wants to do it, you say that's terrorism. But when it's you, you're like, yeah, it's okay for us to want to do it. So no, we just have to say, even if there are things on the periphery, we could say, well, hypothetically, we could see a situation for the purposes of how we engage in politics and how we engage with each other right now. We have to say, no, this stuff is unacceptable, because even for every one time where you could say, in that case, it would have been beneficial, there will be a million times that it will be abused and will make this country a far poorer place for all of us.
I think the difference is it doesn't matter if we condemn like the crime that people do as a response to poverty. Frankly, they're still going to do it. Like, they're desperate enough that they do not care how you punish them. Like, at a certain point, they're gonna fucking rob the Louis Vuitton store. They're gonna fucking loot the Target, right?
You've heard the phrase looting is like looting and riots are part of the language of the unheard. So it sounds like I don't like being on a thing where we're just all like openly and unanimously agreeing like, yeah, this thing is bad, but then they're.
I'm not interested in whether or not it's bad, because like the thing is that if you say it's bad, that implies a prescription that it still isn't going to do anything, because it doesn't matter how bad you punish these people, they are still going to behave in this way.
That's not true.
Again, the best way to deal with that would be to simply give them better social safety nets. I agree with you, by the way, Rob. It's not just about giving them money. We got to build out infrastructure too. We got to put money into fucking education. Yeah, like we got to create jobs.
That's the problem. Too much. The education. It has nothing to do with money. It has to do with the indoctrination in education. But the problem that you're isolating.
I love you, Rob.
Yes.
I love you, Rob. I appreciate you being here. I really do. Actually.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's kind of right.
We increase the amount of money all the time in our education value. We've increased the amount of money we put in education year after year, and yet the quality of our education goes down and down. So saying that the problem is throwing more money at education, if we don't fundamentally solve the problems with our education system, is irrelevant. Throwing more money at a broken system.
No, that's not true at all.
It's not what we do.
Sure it is.
He's arriving.
A lot of our schools are getting less and less money every year because it compounds in on itself due to the fact that schools are funded based off of graduation rates and attendance. So if you are a low-performing school and you have students dropping out or not graduating, that is actually going to result in less money, which will then result in less people graduating, and it'll just keep on getting worse and worse and worse. Even if that was true, that would be true on a micro level. Even if that was true, it'd be true on a micro level of specific schools. But we can see our education system on whole. So, for example, what you're saying would be, please let me finish.
let me finish. What you're saying, we would see it
then
wouldn't be
Lorenzo
zero
and
sum.
Doobie.
Right? Because what would happen would be, well, less people are graduating from this school, but that would either mean one, there were less people graduating overall, but then the schools that were graduating more would get, as long as the whole pie is growing, which it is, the amount of money we're putting into education, then other schools would be getting more money, and we would expect on the whole to see our education increasing. We don't. The education, despite putting more money in it in the macro level, is still declining.
You understand that this is why like wealth inequality between white people and black people is worse now than it was under the end of Jim Crow?
So let's go, let's go to
no choice.
Lorenzo, Doobie, Malat, and Pan.
So Rob is arriving to the right conclusion with the wrong working, but I guess like it still works. Throwing money at education will only solve part of the problems. That's like expenses for like books and teachers and stuff like that. But Rob is 100% correct that there has to be like a revamp in the education system that doesn't necessarily have to do with money. Of course, he's talking about like CRT and like black people like fucking influencing, you know, the beautiful white kids.
Damn, you
but
guys
like,
are
of course,
victims.
I'm talking about like a more like Montessori education system when it comes to like preschools and stuff like that. They're like specific in this have to change, and it's not all money.
Let's go to Doobie.
So I don't have a whole lot to say just yet, but I just wanted to point out that it's pretty interesting to see people who were saying that we need like armed militias to fight a tyrannical government, saying in response to Prime's hypothetical, where you have a corporation that owns the government's totally unresponsive to your pleas for help when this corporation is polluting and poisoning your community. You said that even in that scenario, there's no justification for taking up arms and fighting that company. That seems really fucking weird. Like, I don't know. It seems like you're holding this company, you're like putting them on a pedestal. Whereas if the government were poisoning your community and you're telling them to stop, and they're saying, "Fuck you, we're gonna poison your community anyway," you'd probably say, "Oh God, it's time to take up arms and overthrow the fucking government." Really fucking weird. I don't get it.
He said right now,
But it's interesting.
if there's a place that's happening, he said it could hypothetically be justifiable, right? So if there is a place where like this company is like completely polluting the water or and stuff in a river, then yeah, maybe it would be justified. I don't think, well, at least I wouldn't, necessarily disagree with that.
I'll respond directly. It's because you're misunderstanding what I'm saying on the militia topic, right? I'm saying that a militia has the right to exist for defense, right? And what I'm talking about specifically in the situation like Kenosha is they saw their property being attacked. They had the right to defend themselves because the government was not taking up the mantle of providing the defense that the social contract that us as the people have signed that say, yeah, that's absolutely true. They allowed that community to defend. Right?
How many arrests were there? The police were actually active, like in that.
They were not active.
Also, there were no police. There were no arrests on that night.
There may have been
you know that.
Arrest
Like,
enough
they
to
were
stop the
active.
violence.
They were active. There were. No, it's not a straw man. My argument was how many arrests were there, like that we saw, like that the police were clearly active. So then, if you're saying they weren't active, then that means then you wouldn't see any arrests, or you wouldn't have you wouldn't have seen a completely disarmed police. We saw Kyle Rittenhouse walk past a bunch of police with sirens on, going to where some of the unrest was happening. What are you talking about? How many arrests happened that night?
That's a question of capacity.
So let me answer.
Right, so they were responding.
Is the fact that I understand more filibuster, classic fanatic. You asked the question.
At least you got it. Counterpoints.
You can't let me respond because this is constantly your motif. You know that you can't keep up with almost anyone intellectually unless you're playing the.
That's why you never talk to me one-on-one, Rob.
You just filibuster over them after you ask the question. I sit there and listen to you. The point is, the Rittenhouse situation directly proves that the police weren't active because they sit there and watch the Rittenhouse situation happen because they stood back. We've seen over and over that mayors admitted that they told the police to stand back and allow the riots to, quote, burn themselves out. This occurred in Pittsburgh. This occurred in Philadelphia. It occurred in New York. It occurred in Portland. It occurred in Seattle.
Did it occur in Kenosha?
In Kenosha.
Did it occur in Kenosha?
Yes, just because they may have arrested. Real quick, just because they may have arrested some people at the Reverie, they clearly wasn't effective at stopping the violence. You can say no one believes me. That's fine. The reality is the truth that we can see that this violence occurred for 3 nights. We saw these mass amounts of riots, fires, and things like that going on with impunity.
Okay. Madeline, and then Problematic Pan.
To bounce off of Doobie's point, like that is actually really interesting. Like the government is failing a social contract and not like holding companies accountable for, like for example, the DuPont company has gotten a lot of trouble for letting BFAs or is it PFAs? PFAs in the water system. PFAs are this toxic chemical that does bad things, obviously, and they've been polluting a lot of rural areas with their the industry. I believe it was for frying pans. They were putting Teflon on, using PFAs to put Teflon in frying pans, and there's a required adhesive to make it all work. And what these companies will do, they'll just like walk away from their factories when the heat gets too high, and they leave these rural communities in ruin. And the government's not doing anything to stop these. I mean, the government does some things to, like, try to clean up, try to claim recompense from the industry. But at the end of the day, these companies still get to continue to pollute and continue to ruin these communities. So I do think there's something to be said about communities kind of getting recourse for protecting themselves, because they're slowly being poisoned, right? I also wanted to talk. Oh, I lost the thread because we got into that heated thing about Kenosha. I have something later.
Education.
Thank you. Yeah, education. Yeah. So going back to the education, a big part of keeping people able to make money is to give them the ability to generate wealth. It's not just, we don't want to just hand money to people. We want them to have a way of generating money consistently, whether that's through land or education or having like trade skills. And I think there's something to be said for money being put into education, and us in the United States having like the sort of saturation of folks going to college, and then like a lower percentage of the population getting into the trade skills, which are, quite a bit more lucrative than some of the university educations that they'll have. I also want to say, as someone who goes to a variety of schools regularly to teach students chess, there's definitely a correlation between money at a school and how the kids behave and how cooperative they are in my classes. I've noticed that the less money there is in the education system overall, or in the school, involved in the school that I'm teaching at, the more uncooperative the kids tend to be. This is an anecdotal thing, and it might not be relevant, but I mean, I've taught at like hundreds of schools at this point, so I've seen a lot of schools, and so it's like a fairly good anecdotal point, I think. But I would need like some statistics to back up my point here. Anyway, that's all.
Wait, so
Thanks,
can you guys just just kind of bouncing off what Mad Lad said right there? There are companies like fracking companies that poison drinking water across the country. You can look at like Flint, Michigan, where for I think like decades now they've had issues with lead in the fucking drinking water, and it's causing like massive problems across the population there. So decades. So the government doesn't seem to be very responsive. Some of these problems are being caused by private corporations. So at what point is it okay, Rob, for a militia to get together, a group to get together and say, hey, fuck this. This is killing our children. It's killing our people. And we're going to take down this corporation.
It's not. Right?
Is that done by corporations? I thought the Flint water crisis had to do with the
I didn't realize we have so many
government
NCAPs on this fucking
pipes.
panel. Like ever? When?
I could give my response if you want.
Go
Right?
for it.
They don't have the response to do it because there's other more effective. So there's the moral question of, do they morally have the right? No, they don't. And the reason is because as soon as we say that they morally have the right, then everyone will say, well, there's an issue in my town that I think's unfair. So we're going to get the people together and we're going to go in and use violence. And Prime can shake his head all he wants, but the world would look like the way, as soon as we say that that's legitimate, what we'll see is constantly everyone will take up that mantle. But then there's also, even if you don't belie the moral argument, there's the strategic argument. No, there are better ways to go about dealing with these things, whether it be corporations or state acting poorly, which is negatively affecting, than picking up arms and starting to kill people or destroy a company or sabotage it through physical violence and things like that. For example, we have information. You can get campaigns. You can go out and do stuff. Go out and mobilize people to pressure to change things in a peaceful way. If you go in, what do you think is going to happen right now? So, for example,
Rob, how does all this not apply to the government? How does everything you just said not apply to the government? Everything.
What do you I don't understand the question.
Rob,
Yes, it applies to corporations and the government. And
okay, so then why do we need militias at all then?
Oh my God, can I answer this question?
We're talking about extreme violence.
Right, and it's not just that, right? The idea is you have the right to get together to defend yourself. If you're saying right now, right? For example, a militia has the right. Let me ask you this, Prime.
Before you do that, hold on. Problematic Parents said extreme violence. Hold on. Like, is poisoning the community and killing them dead one way or the other, is that not extreme violence, right? It might be slower.
I'm not accepting problematic
Pan. Yeah, that's fine if you're not acquainted to his definition. But like Pan, like extreme violence, right? Or economic violence when like they're literally tossing you out of your house, right? Now they get the government to do it. They get the police to do it, right? Rather than like literally armed thugs, right? They get the police, a better dressed thugs to do it. But there's still violence that's being done to you and your family, right? Like, so you're saying all of that. So the government, corporations, can do all of that, and we can't respond in equal fashion, or through, again, I gave a peaceful means, like through hacking, right? But we can take up arms against like the government directly with their planes, with their tanks, with all that. That makes more sense. Those two things can exist simultaneously.
No, but I didn't say that. I do think that if they're poisoning your water supply and killing you slowly, and you've exhausted all other means, and you're still getting killed off slowly, it's definitely fine. I mean, those companies are like violating your rights. So yeah, you should have a right to do violent action if all those other means have
I would look,
have been exhausted.
I hate doing this. I hate being this person, but I would say in those sorts of situations, as opposed to like doing some sort of violence, I would say it'd probably be better just to move. Now, I get that not everybody has the ability to move. I get that has with it all of its costs and all those things. But I promise you, like the actual opportunity cost from like jumping in this like government sanctioned freaking organization and going into war with your militia, and that like getting you imprisoned and thereby not allowing you to provide for your family is so much worse than you actually.
I has been drowned there for 10 years. If so, they could move, they would have moved by now. Everybody who can get out of Flint is fucking long gone, my man. Nobody's just staying there hoping that the situation gets better because they like the taste.
To be clear, I just said that I just said that violence would be morally justifiable, not that it's the optimal course. I agree with you that leaving would probably be a better solution in this case. But if someone were to get violent about it, I wouldn't blame them.
Okay, please let me go. Please let me go.
Oh God, Counterpoints doing his thing again.
Oh, you've talked like fucking 5 times more than me on this subject so far. So do you want to fucking bitch
literally
about
have
me talking,
not.
or you just
I
want me to
literally
fucking
have
talk?
not.
Well, I haven't talked yet, so shut the fuck up. Stop bitching. Stop bitching.
Please stop.
Stop bitching. You spend no, fuck this. You spend half your time on this
Say
panel
your stupid banal point already.
No, fuck you. You spend half your time on this panel bitching.
Okay, let's just go.
Yeah, bitching is kind of like a gendered insult, so I'd appreciate it getting to it.
Oh, okay. Complaining aggressively. So, anyways, the point of it is the argument. I saw all of your like eyes light up as soon as we were talking about like parallels to the militia argument, where you were like, oh well, if corporations are abusing this shit, then doesn't it just make sense that you should be able to apply the same moral logic? Well, even when we were talking about the militias or whatever, you have to understand violence is like an absolute last resort, and on top of that, there's situations in which like there's parallel power structures that you're supposed to appeal to first. We're not talking about vigilantism. We're not talking about using militias to replace law enforcement. We're talking about using law enforcement first.
That was baked into the question. That was baked into the
question.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
It's
a
last resort.
So I would say, if the government was intentionally poisoning you, people were getting cancer, and over like decades of unaddressed problems, you weren't like able to get your redress, I would not say that you should attack like law enforcement or attack politicians. But what you should do is you should get a bunch of dudes with guns, go down to the water supply, fix whatever the fucking problem is, get your own water engineers in there, and then basically say, hey, if you come in and fuck this shit up, then basically we're going to do what we got to do in order to protect our own communities. And by the way, as much as this seems far-fetched, in Mexico, this has happened multiple times, where law enforcement is so corrupt and the cartels run with impunity that local militias have said, despite the strict gun laws in our community, we are going to purchase illegal firearms, we're going to patrol our own cities with our own militias, and as a result, they kicked out both law enforcement and the cartels. So there are real world parallels for the kind of things that we're talking about that I think are absolutely fucking based.
There are parallels here, I mean, too. Like, what if it's not decades? Let's say it's just 1 decade, and you know the problem's not going to get fixed because the fucking president came by and fake drank the water and said, oh, it's fine, it's brown, but don't worry about it.
Well, I mean, if you want to use like an IRL example, like Saddam Hussein, basically.
No, I'm talking about Flint, Michigan, but I mean.
Well, do you want to keep it with the business parallel in corruption, or do you want to keep it with like intentional violence? What do you want to do?
Like Flint, Michigan is actually business and it's private. It's government. Sorry, because like the government basically there was like corruption with the city council and the mayor. They had a deal with the dude who was like going to get them cheaper water supply, so they switched back over to an older pipe system, and that's why there's now lead in the water.
Okay, I have another example. I have another example. I think it's was it the Lebanon recently where they had like that dock explosion that killed like a few hundred people, and it was basically due to governmental neglect of the situation, and they gave the government about a year to get their shit together, and they didn't. So basically militias took to the streets in order to say you need to get your shit together. I think that like while I don't know what the ultimate aims of that movement are, I would say if there were extenuating circumstances in which the government wasn't meeting the needs of the people, eventually corruption becomes negligent homicide, and at that point I would say it would be on the people to affect their own changes.
So
Absolutely.
in Flint, Michigan, for example, you'd be, if that happened tomorrow, like if Flint, Michigan like started doing the riot thing, like that's okay now, or?
Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, haven't they had like drinkable water since like 2019, and isn't this kind of a fucking meme at this point?
What do you mean? No, not as far as I know.
Okay, then I'm literally going to pull it up on stream right now because I'm pretty sure I've heard this multiple times.
I think they've improved.
Yeah, didn't they have Obama come and like drink literally brown water and be like, it's fine?
That was a long time ago. But like, don't quote me.
No, okay. Can somebody, sorry, a teammate jumped into my warthog. So if somebody else could please Google it. I'm pretty sure that the lead contaminants within Flint, Michigan have been below the fucking like regulated safety standard for parts per million since 2019. Other people, because basically they feel so fucked over by their government, they have decided to not drink the water and are still drinking bottled water. But I think that's pretty much a choice at this point, not actually like a necessity.
So they solved the problem without the violence. Now, let me ask you, Spectre, let's say that they would have started killing some people or destroying pipes and stuff. Would it have been better? Would it have been more effective?
Considering that it went on for damn near a decade, like I don't even know how to answer that question. Also, like this wasn't a hard problem to fix because when the lead,
it's a very hard problem to fix. What are we talking about?
No, I just told you what. You don't listen when I explained what happened initially.
No, I listened, but they had to repipe half the fucking city.
That's no, they already had the old pipes that they were using. They already had the old pipes that they were using that wasn't with the dude that the city council had an in with. And when listen, let me finish this because this is so fucked up and you can look it up, dude. Like when they got to a point where the lead in the water was actually affecting the cars at the factory that they would have to wash off at the end, like it was affecting the structural integrity of the car, they switched those pipes back before they did the other ones, like unironically.
So I just want to say
they were able to get clean water into that. Like
if it's economically necessary to continue the health of the city, that kind of makes sense. But you know,
and I actually think this is interesting that these two topics have coincided like that because, like, again, so if we look at this seems to going back to the previous topic, the idea of we just trust the government. The government will take care of all these things. One of the reasons that the government probably eventually felt compelled to be able to fix this problem was because they started to get fucking afraid that the people weren't going to take it anymore. If the people aren't allowed to be armed, now real quick, if the people aren't allowed to be armed, then perhaps the government says, we don't give a fuck. There's nothing you could do. This is the difference. Let me finish my point real quick. This is the difference between having the right to arm yourself, being a deterrent because you don't have to use it. Whereas if we took away that people's rights, then we may find ourselves in the situation where we wish that threat was there to compel the government, which created this problem in the first place, to do the right thing.
Who's arguing the Second Amendment? That had nothing to do with the conversation.
Y'all brought up the militia parallel. Okay, what the fuck?
So what's actually interesting about the whole fact that this is government run or whatever, as a Michigander, actually, I was in Michigan at the time this whole Flint thing was happening. It was actually the Republican governor of Michigan who actually decided to switch the water. There was he had emergency powers over the city, and then directed that the water supply be changed. And it's not to say that Republican governor bad, et cetera. It's just very interesting that we're talking about like the government being directing, like controlling the water supply, and you would think that a right-wing governor would have, found some sort of solution that didn't involve the government and then proceeded to do the thing that.
Okay, do you know why? Because it's cheap, and Republicans tend to be fiscal conservatives. He fucked up. He tried to save a dime and ended up spending $1.
That wasn't the main problem. The main problem was that he wanted to give access to the Nestle, to Nestle to have access to the water, and that's what it did. So then he switched it. Then, that was his real motivation. And that was where
and my point, and with the pipes, and maybe I'm wrong because it's been a long time, but what I remember, it was just switching the water source, and then the water source, because it wasn't properly balanced, right? Corroded the pipes, the pipes, and then they had to actually repipe the area. I remember them actually having them dig it out, but each house cost a certain amount of money, and then they weren't on supply of it. That's my understanding of it. That situation.
You are right, Prime. That's exactly what it is. It's not what these other idiots were saying.
What the fuck were we saying? We said the same shit. What the fuck are you talking about?
I think he was talking about Spectre.
No, hold on, because you are saying different stuff. Hold on, Mad Lad. Didn't you say that the Republican governor basically switched the piping system?
No, not the piping system. The source of the
water. Source of water.
Yeah.
And the water source.
Say that originally.
No, he did. No, Mad Latin did. But I think Spectre, you had a different answer with the pipes.
I was under the impression that they still managed to get clean water in for car companies.
Because they switched their source back, from my understanding of the situation.
Right. And the point is the water source corroded the pipes.
Yeah, the water source corroded the pipes. Yeah.
But the bottom line is
you're not all idiots, Fanatic.
Okay, but do you understand that? Do you understand that repiping would solve the problem too? Because the problem was the fact that it was an old style of pipe. So when they had the corrosive pipe, that's where the lead was coming from because it was leaching from the fucking pipe. So you have two fucking things there.
That's
you
why
can go for the better treated water.
Okay, that's why I'm saying Counterpoint was one of the idiots, because he's wrong. It had nothing. It's not about the pipe system. It had everything to do with the water source. The water source corrupted the pipes.
Do you want me to Google this shit?
Yes, I do.
Yes,
I would love that.
I don't think you guys are.
Go ahead.
No, fuck this. Fanatic wants to waste half his time bitching about how other people fucking talk.
Because you're an idiot. That's why.
No, Fanatic, you're a fucking tool, and you're consistently a tool. So you can eat my whole ass.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. I don't think you guys were even that far apart in this, all right? And I don't think it's where I just was a little confused.
Right. It's just me and Fanatic because he's a fucking asshole.
Okay, all right.
That was smart one, though, you idiot.
Mad Latin, finish a point, and then Doobie, please.
Well, fuck. What was my point? I lost. You go ahead,
okay, Doobie, please.
No, Doobie, let me know when you're fucking done, dude.
Control your impulses, mister. Okay. So, I just want to be very clear about Rob's position. So, if we did have a situation where there's a corporation that was in with the government or the government official in the area, and they were doing something terrible to the local population, right? And there was and the government was unresponsive to the population's request to fix the problem. You would be okay with an armed militia coming together and doing what they needed to do to stop whatever this corporation was doing.
Yeah,
Rob.
Man,
Robert?
I said no. Yeah,
no.
The reason you want a reason? Sure.
Yeah.
Tried to give a little brevity, and people asked for more for once. That's fine, great.
Okay.
The reason is because there's the fact that they could arm themselves in protest. That would be fine. The idea that they unilaterally arm themselves and attack and use physical violence is not fine, right? Is there a hypothetical where if this went on for decades and decades and the people kept to bring? But the problem is at that point, once people, like for example, Flint. Imagine it. Let's use that as the real example.
Rob,
so
please, can I?
Yeah, let me finish real quick. I'll be
respond,
30 seconds at the most.
Yeah.
30 seconds at the most. I'll just say this. Look at the Flint situation. Do we think that would have brought help if people would have armed themselves and attacked the governor or attacked the company that, was not after the switch of water, didn't properly do things with the pipe? No, it wouldn't have helped, right? Now, the fact that people had a voice and brought pressure to that voice, it may have taken a long time, but that informing people was the real warfare. The ability to have the potential to defend yourself is important for being able to have teeth behind the forcing government to be afraid and actually change their policies. But even in that situation, I do not think it would have been morally acceptable nor strategic to have people pick up arms and start shooting at people like Governor Rick Snyder.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Fanatic, you fucking idiot.
Why?
Literally 20 seconds of fucking Googling. The first thing that pops up is the fact that how they fixed the problem is by repiping the fucking city. You would know this shit if you fucking Googled it, because the pipes are made out of lead. So if you come back at me and you say, Connor, it's because the water is corrosive. No shit. What is it corrosive to? The lead pipes, you fucking tool. So next time you come on a fucking panel with me, if you don't want me to talk to you like this, number one, stop policing the way other people fucking talk. Number two, don't spend 20% of your fucking talking time policing the way other people talk. Number three, when you think you're fucking right about something and you use a term like disgusting or idiot, know what the fuck you're talking about, because you are a fucking tool who literally does not know what the fuck you're talking about, and it literally took me 10 seconds to verify the information that you were confidently shit talking about 30 seconds later. So right here, fuck you, eat my whole ass. 20 seconds of Googling would have saved you this embarrassment, and fuck you, be a better human being, or we're gonna continue our relationship this way, you piece of shit.
I don't know if you would call this. I don't know if you would call this a relationship. But one, it's funny to me that you're telling me not to police. You're policing me on how I conduct myself, and saying that the problem is me policing things. This is so freaking petty and ridiculous. Yes, I get that they needed to change the thing. That has nothing to do with the fact that the source of the water is what initially contaminated their freaking pipes. Like, the source was a problem. They had been using the same pipes in these houses initially. If you would like to, we can have a conversation. We can have a conversation on this subject in and of itself. I promise you. Yeah, but not now. Obviously,
I know. But it just it feels like you guys are literally saying the same thing, right? But emphasizing different parts, right? You're saying that the water source was the problem because they made the switch, and then Counterpoints is saying that the source of the actual poisoning was the pipes that were corroded because the water source has changed. That's it. Right. You guys are just emphasizing strongly
those are two different
parts.
Things.
Yeah, I know, but like they work in conjunction, right? If one didn't happen, then the other one would have happened, right? So I don't.
Right, and I'm saying what the initial problem was, and he's ignoring.
I think you guys should both found like a militia to like resolve this issue.
Whole ass militia.
Yeah, the whole ass militia, and then we'll have the.
It's just insane because this nigga gets indignant literally every time he's not talking. It's not about policing somebody. It's that like literally we'll be in the middle of having a conversation, and this nigga he acts like a straight 4-year-old. Please, Prime, hold on. Oh my God, I gotta talk right now. I'm gonna kill something. He does it all the freaking time, like literally. And it's like, yo, we can have a freaking conversation, but can you relax ever?
Okay. All right.
In fairness, you suck quite often. And second, you literally said that an opinion that you basically were agreeing on a lot of things was disgusting. That Mad Lad and Counterpoint said. So I understand him getting frustrated when you come at it with that type of language. And you do suck way more than anyone on this panel.
Boy. Okay.
So
okay.
I value your opinion.
Boy.
I know you don't.
Great.
Personally, I think Doobie sucks the most.
Great.
Trust me, it's good for viewers anyways, Prime. If you had Fanatic on, you weren't getting a productive conversation.
That's true. People pretend like they don't like it, but then like the numbers go up every single time.
Oh yeah.
But all right, let's go. All right, we still got time for this topic, so I still want to talk about it.
Okay.
So
the point was. No. Okay, but I was just gonna say. So the point of this whole thing is. We're trying to decide whether it's okay for a population to engage in vigilante recourse to solve their problems, right? Now, I'm one of those hypocrites that you were referencing earlier, Rob. I think I'm going to say publicly, this is terrible. We shouldn't allow this sort of thing. But like privately, I'm always cheering on the folks who are like, getting their own in a society where they can't, right? And I think the solution here, I want to talk about the solutions more so than like whether it's okay or not. I think the solution here is that we just need to address the excesses of our economic system. And I think we need to actually focus on what those safety nets should look like. So like the excesses would be things like businesses destroying products that they can't sell. And I think safety nets would be things like not even like even the minimum wage, but like just a UBI, right? Like if people could just have money, then there wouldn't be any of this.
Like, for example, like, is anyone here going to say with a straight face that everyone that loots these places is destitute?
No, not everyone, but in like this case of like the Louis Vuitton store where like a fucking mob went in, like I'm pretty sure that like even outside of them being destitute, like we understand that crime happens at higher rates in high poverty areas. Like that's just data that we have, yeah?
Yeah.
Right, but
Okay.
this is, Inspector, you're the one that I really wanted to address this to, because you said, well, this stuff's going to inevitably happen if we have poverty. Look, poverty will always exist. And yes, you're right. On average, that means that people are more likely to commit all crimes, not just crimes to get money, but maybe crimes like drug-related crimes, sex-related crimes, all sorts of violence. All of those crimes, you're right, in areas with higher poverty, particularly high poverty areas with high population, or you're likely to see increase. However, what we're talking about specifically with this topic, we don't see happening around much of this country. We don't see this mass looting. It occurs in very specific situations, and it occurs when we have prosecutors that seem to decriminalize this sort of behavior. So the first step to stop this sort of behavior, which is why I asked, is start punishing the people that do it.
Where was this behavior decriminalized?
In California.
California?
It hasn't legally been decriminalized. What he's saying is that since the DAs don't really prosecute for this shit, it's essentially decriminalized, which is basically true. I mean, that's how else would... There's no other way that like
I do
80 people would be brazen enough to all go rob a store at once in broad day. Like the retail theft rates in California are absolutely nuts.
Okay.
Yeah, well, okay,
wanted
well,
to
just
see from you
so,
what
just
this example of
to be
safety
clear for
laws
everybody, the reason
is.
for that ban, kind of what just to really quickly hit on what the decriminalization thing, because in California, I think thefts under $950 aren't considered like a felony, if I remember correctly. So it's like effectively like decriminalized. So you have tons of people walking into fucking Walgreens and taking shit off the shelves and walking off with it. And as a result, a lot of these companies are closing up locations because they don't want to be in a place where people just walking in and walking away with their stock for, like willy nilly. Right. So yeah, that's correct.
And just be clear, like, this is why I love a lot of my left-leaning friends, right, and big government friends. I don't think that you're an immoral person for having these sort of ideas. You see a poor person, you say, we want policies that help these people, but you have to be realistic, because you could make the argument, well, we want to decriminalize any theft under $1,000, and because poor people are more likely to steal. So this will help them out, net benefit. But in reality, what happens is it leads to a chain of events that ends up hurting poor people even more, because then people say, hell, even if I get caught, which basically these companies tell their employees, don't even call the police, because the police don't show up unless it's a big theft anymore. But even if you get caught, your fine is less than the average amount that you could steal each time you go in. So you'll still take that risk every day, which then causes these stores to leave, which loses economic and retail opportunities for the very poor people that live in these communities. The reality is, if you're in San Francisco and you're working at a Fortune 500 company and you have a $5 million house, you probably don't give a shit that Target left. You don't care. Who cares?
Yeah,
the lady that's raising 3 kids that works at Target.
I'm not
The lady that
saying
wants to buy milk for her daughter. You know?
I'm not saying that Target leaving is the solution. Like, if these companies are actually experiencing theft at a higher rate due to this decriminalization law, to the point where they are leaving and it is hurting the economy, I am fine with like recriminalizing that. But I would like to fix like the frankly punitive justice system in this country. But that's a whole other conversation. I guess what I'm getting at here is that what we don't seem to ever be solving for in these situations is the fact that there are going to be some people who commit at least more crime due to the fact that they are poor. Like, people who live in high poverty areas commit more crime. So if you simply not necessarily give them cash payments, but earlier also with the education thing that I was talking about, I wasn't saying give all schools an equal amount of money. You focus on the ones that are underfunded, right? Because those are the ones that fucking need it. And there's the kids that fucking need it. Because
yeah, we can do that by giving money to the kids instead of the area code, so that each student has a certain amount of money, basically, that they're allocated that they get to the school. So all people, all area codes
do that and have a higher rate of segregation than we did at the
not true
1960s. So yes, they do. Oh boy,
charter schools serve more minorities than public schools, at least as a percentage. Obviously,
it depends on how good the charter school is. There's a lot of them that
on how exactly. Thank you, Matt.
I mean,
but on average, they're better.
Well, obviously, it depends on the state. Obviously.
I've taught at a bunch. I can compare public schools with the charter schools that I've seen personally, and my personal experience says that I would rather send my children to public schools. Now, that's just a personal anecdote. I don't have the numbers. Spectre's way better at looking things up. So
no. So here's the thing: is that there's some really great charter schools, but they're full of white kids. So like, yeah, I mean,
that's not true. The numbers are pretty. I could look them up. The numbers are pretty. Please, segregation's irrelevant to this conversation. Like, if I'm someone who lives in the let me explain. If I'm in the inner city and I go send my kid to a public school that's 90% black and he's getting a shit education, or I could send him to a charter school that's 100% black and he gets a fucking awesome education and then goes off to college and becomes incredibly wealthy, I don't give a shit that there weren't a couple white kids around him. I don't care. I'm more interested in every child having an opportunity to have good education. And the reality is, when it comes to charter schools, we can see that on average, minorities that go to charter schools do far better than most of these inner city schools that have an abysmal.
That actually is true.
I thought that was true.
Why wouldn't it be true even with the variables that you were talking about?
I'm sorry.
What was the point?
No, but my point is, like, even if you were saying, like so for instance, like I was a school resource officer at a fucking charter school. So if I was a school resource officer at a charter school and they were able to hand select the kids that they were able to teach, even if those kids were like minority students, why wouldn't they be doing better long term, even if they were basically like intentionally selecting who they were going to do based off of like academic proficiency? The thing you objected to. Yeah, the thing you objected to would still work within your framework. Well, okay, so basically they have to serve a certain segment of the community that's like baked in, right? But at the same time, they have a certain amount of vouchers for people who are like outside of the community, outside of the zip code, in order to allow in, and they have those slots. Typically, they have to do a lottery, but yeah, they can also pick some of the students that they basically.
Okay, well that's not what I'm asking.
They receive additional funding based off of graduation rates, so they select for the best students they can find who are already performing well most of the time.
Well,
so
okay,
some data. I got some data
Sorry,
I can show you. 2017 report found that nationwide per student K-12 education funding from all sources, local, state, and federal, is similar on average at the districts attended by poor students, which get 2.5% more money than the non-poor student districts. The Brookings Institution in 2007 revealed that on average, poor and minority students receive between 1% to 2% more resources than non-poor or white students. Older studies examining school funding have found a similar conclusion, including those from the U.S. Department of Education, Urban Institute, and the Heritage Foundation.
Okay,
Yeah,
Rob,
and
but so Rob, the reason why they have similar things from the state is because typically, like, the at least in the state of Florida, as far as I understand it, the money goes into a pool, and then a certain amount of money is allocated per student, regardless of district, and the schools report how many students they have. Right? That's how the money is allocated. But the reason why I still think that the property tax argument is valid is because the additional programs, like after-school programs, sports teams, like all that kind of stuff, that's going to be funded by the wealth of the local zip code. So as a result, the things like early school care, after school care, sports teams, what do they call it? Like little brother or older brothers, older sisters. I forget what the fuck they call that program or whatever. But the mentorship programs, those are all going to be more likely to be found in richer neighborhoods. So even if they're spending $8K on a white student in the nice side of town, and they're spending $8K on a black student in the rough side of town, that doesn't really actually reflect the quality of education that they're going for. And finally, with the charter schools, if they can select the kind of student that they have, then basically either through lottery or who they accept into the school or additional disciplinary actions that they're allowed to take as a charter school, then they can kind of make their numbers look better, because it's basically a state-funded private school, because they have more flexibility when it comes to discipline, who attends the school, uniforms, and also curriculum. So that's what I think Spectre is kind of pushing at is, if you just say charter schools and school choice, then what's going to end up happening is just like a whole bunch of kids are going to be left behind because nobody's going to give a fuck about them.
To be clear, that's just specifically your state. In my state, the charter schools have to let you in, like, basically regardless, if you can drive there. So, like, I mean, maybe it sounds like what you have in Florida sucks.
But what about capacity?
But
what about capacity?
What about? I mean, well, okay. Well, what do you mean? What about capacity?
Well,
so you can use like an administrative capacity in order to use discretion. You can say that based off of the zip code or whatever, we're going to admit all of these kids in the into the school, and then if we have like 20% capacity, because you can only have like 20 to 30 students per classroom, if a kid comes from a rough family and you know that it's a rough family and it's a disciplinary case and they're out of zip code, so they're not technically entitled to an education at your charter school, then you can say no, fuck you, and as a result,
well, here they are technically entitled.
Effect.
They are technically entitled here.
I
had to take a bus an hour and a half, to get to the area to get to the charter school. There was no
the Heritage Foundation, which is hilarious to me, by the way, because they've been pushing school choice for like 4 years now, harder than any other conservative think tank.
Sure. Would you like the U.S. Department of Education study and the Urban Institute could agree with them as well?
Yeah, it's
Huh?
ironic.
Sure,
It's ironic that
I'll
this
continue.
line of argument needs to be against charter schools because the reality is that like
I love charter schools.
oh, okay. Well, the reality is that the vast majority of like minorities in this country, even Democrat minorities, support charter schools and school choice. Right. So, yeah, it seems like, and I'm sure they've heard these concerns. Hey, these schools are going to let in the white people, right? But even with that concern on the table, they want school choice. They want charter school. So, I don't know.
And
It's
to
very
respond
democratic.
a little bit, because I think Connor was, kind of pushing back on what I was saying. So to respond a little, one, I don't think you're right. I don't think you're wrong about when it comes to extracurricular and sort of support network outside of school funding. Certainly, if you're in an area that is wealthier, even if the amount of money your government is spending on your student is $5,000 less than the amount they're spending on an inner city student, yeah, absolutely. The most important thing is your family safety, your family support and things like that. But certainly other things, more extracurricular activities and extracurricular groups, absolutely. But that's not a problem of just throwing more funding at schools, which is exactly what I'm talking about. Secondly, the problem is many of these inner city schools, regardless of how much money we send, are fucking war zones. And they have people working at them that, whether it be their fault or not, aren't the best teachers and aren't the best educators. And that fucking sucks. It's not fair. It's not just a matter of, well, let's just if we just send $10,000 more for a student there, that's not going to help the problem if we don't solve the fundamental things that we are teaching and the administrators and teachers that have there. I think that the curriculum is shit, not just in inner cities, but around this country, which is why we can see the United States, when it comes to K through 12 education, spends more money than almost any country in the world. And yet the quality of our education on average, both in poor and more wealthy schools, is declining rapidly, including the countries that spend far less on it. So what we're teaching and things like that are terrible. I don't have to tell you which party has a stranglehold on the education system and who they support, but neither here nor there.
Depending on which day, right?
So you think the Democrats have a stranglehold on the education
Why do
system
we-
and Republicans are in power?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I think the
Like,
Democrats
wow,
and
why is it
the teachers union.
Please explain this.
May I respond?
I got it. So let's talk about the fact. That if we look in places like the South, where you have like all of this legislation that's like clearly controlling what can be taught, right? We see all this pushback happening against CRT. Then you have all of the historic, like when it came to the way the Daughters of the Confederacy, how they got together and like started drafting and started shaping all of their rules for what sort of textbooks can can be shown at a school, which directly controlled why the people in the South don't believe that the Civil War had anything to do with freaking slavery. So like the idea that like Democrats are having a stranglehold on like K through 12 education, which is what you were referring to, is absolutely ridiculous. It's absolutely not true. But what you can say is when it comes to like more left-leaning people having a stranglehold on like college universities, yeah, I'll give you that. But K through 12, that's absolutely ridiculous. It really, really, really depends on which state you're in, because obviously in freaking Texas, they had that case in which they literally had in their textbooks that people that were slaves were what they call the migrant workers. It's just not. It's not the case.
And not just that.
Oh,
I would
so
also
why does
add
it
that
matter?
the Texas school board actually gets to decide what.
Textbooks.
And
usually
okay,
what
it's not just a
textbooks
matter
from
of
Texas gets shipped over.
right.
to
It's
all-
not
Why
just a
does it
matter.
matter
So
what
the type
party?
of curriculum that's put forth by by the state is only a small portion of how the education gets taught. The affiliation and the beliefs of the teachers and of the unions that control the teachers is far more important, because just because you have to use a certain textbook, I had this happen all the time. For example, I had a teacher in high school that was a biology teacher who was a creationist. He was adamant that Christianity is the real religion and that we were all created. And he told us up front that was true. But he said we have to talk about evolution and things like that. Yet he colored conversations of evolution constantly with his beliefs in Christianity. Now, the curriculum said he had to teach out of this book, and he did. He met that curriculum, but his personal preferences as a teacher had more influence on that education than the pure textbook that we're using. The same is true when it comes to education all around this country. We can see it's not even close. These teachers' unions are part and parcel. In fact, they're the most powerful union probably when it comes to support for the Democratic Party. We could see the decisions they made. We could see the individual teachers and the political affiliations
It's
that
so
they
crazy
had.
How
that
did
you
we
would say
land
that.
We can
It's so
see
crazy
that
that
our
you would gonna gish gallop? Are you just gonna gish gallop for 10 minutes? It's crazy to me
Fanatic,
saying
you
that
talk more than anyone when you get the ball. You don't
I
say
believe you. I believe
At
that
least
you
I'm
believe
making
that.
points.
It's so crazy.
That's disgusting. Your points are disgusting. I'm black. I'm a victim. We get it, Fanatic. You don't have to gish gallop because you don't have any points. We get it. Eat Connor's whole ass.
It's really crazy to me.
Rob.
Thank you. It's really crazy to me that you would sit here and try to pretend as if, like, yes, like that you would make this point that yes, the teachers are going to have a direct impact on people's students. So who do you think are going to be the people teaching in these incredibly red states that are like super duper Republican? Clearly, in those cases, those teachers are going to be Republican. And guess what? The school boards in those states are going to be Republican. Let's not forget about how all of these southern states, immediately after Brown versus Board of Education got passed, immediately started creating all of these private schools and pupil placement laws and all of these things in order to insulate and inculcate their white children. This has been done for God knows how long. We still see that there's crazy segregation in southern states right now as far as school attendance is concerned. It's de facto segregation, but it's still happening. So the idea, I mean, goodness, I think it was in the state of Mississippi, they were saying less than 10% of black students were in non-segregated schools, in the sense that all of their students, all their fellow students were all black. It's still happening all around the country because you typically go to the school that's zoned around where you live. And in most of these cases, we still see how crazy segregation is in the United States. It's not legal segregation, but we have de facto segregation. So yeah, these people are still influencing them. The idea that Democrats are having an impact on Southern schools when it comes to education is laughable when we know that less than 18% of people can identify the Civil War today. Less than 18% of high school seniors can identify
gish galloping here from Fanatic. Sounds like some gish galloping here.
Doobie to try to respond. Doobie.
Yeah, go ahead, respond. Respond to anything I said. You weren't listening.
Sure, I will. I will respond. You're fundamentally wrong.
You'll get to. I promise you will. I promise. Write it down. So I want to make sure you get everything.
Seriously, you do have to. I like that you covered for Fanatic. You have to. He can't do it himself.
No. Doobie's got to talk. All right, Doobie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually not going to respond to anything Fanatic or Rob are saying. But Rob, I just want to ask you: Can you stop bringing up Fanatic's race when you're responding to him, or doing this I'm black, I'm a victim thing?
He's a perpetual race grifter, and it's been in everything he said.
Hold on.
I don't give a shit. I'll bring up the one. I don't need you to police me either.
In this. I don't know why you keep saying I'm black.
Did you say the word bitch? That's gendered. Could you not say that? Yes, bitch. I'll say what I want on this.
I don't think,
especially when it's bad faith actors like Fanatic.
I don't think there's any reason to continually bring up the race of another person on the panel. It's really fucking weird.
Yes, when his arguments are centered around him and his ideas of being a victim because of his race, and he constantly makes it up, then yes, I could do that. Secondly, I don't give a shit what you want to go.
He's making the same arguments that other people.
You could have someone like Fanatic go on there and be his race at all. I don't give a fuck. I don't care at all. Prime doesn't like it. Kick me off. I'm not going to listen to you or Fanatic try to boss and tell me how I'm going to talk. I don't give a shit.
Okay.
Can I do something productive?
Let's knock it off. Great. Yeah. Oh my god. Oh god, I'm making it so fucking difficult. I don't know why you guys are making this. Oh my god, I just fucking hate it sometimes.
More content, bro.
Can I do something productive?
Oh, okay, yeah, do something productive.
You may speak quite up.
Okay, Rob. Okay, so Rob, the concern, which I think is a fair concern, is that while school choice can be a solution for individuals, and kind of like Doobie was saying, that basically it probably would be preferred by a lot of people of color because it represents opportunity to get their kids good education and then get them out of the shitty situations that they're in. The very real concern that I share with Spectre is that when you individualize systems and you just say hey, get good, drive 2 hours out of zip code in order to do it, and if you really care, then you'll invest in your kids' education and all that kind of stuff, is that there's a bunch of kids who basically get left behind. And as a result, regardless of whether or not the funding is currently equitable for education itself, there's a whole bunch of situations in which public education is not equitable. So if you're talking about discipline, or if you're talking about uniforms, or if you're talking about extracurriculars, or if you're talking about any of the things that I talked about that would oftentimes be paid for by the parents, either through property taxes or just in general wealth and donations, then we're kind of fucked in a few respects, and we're worried that a lot of kids are going to get left behind. So that's where, for me, I would want a dual solution. Number one, I don't care about if school choice makes it better. What's actually interesting is like No Child Left Behind got a lot of fucking shit talk about it. Bush's policy, it actually broke up a lot of really toxic and shitty schools and made them better. And then also, so if it takes a combination solution of individualization of opportunity, but also investment in schools, then I think that's the ultimate centrist position that we could invest in that would actually not make anybody happy, but would actually address the problem. And I think that's the problem is we keep going at everything.
What we're advocating would increase funding for inner city schools, though, right? Because right now, on average, they're getting less per pupil than the students in rich, suburbs and rich area codes. So this would increase funding for these, poor schools.
Wait, how would it increase the funding if it's school choice? Who would choose to go to the poor school?
You tie the money to the
convenience. Are you kidding me? So many people would just choose to go to the school that's closest to them. We have that here.
Yeah, most people go to the school that's closest to them, don't they?
Exactly. Yeah, because convenience. So
I mean, just by default,
why
that's
would
what it's assigned in their district, dude? So what are you saying?
So this is the way the money.
I don't know where you are.
To the poor schools.
Spectre, this is the way the money would be divvied out. Let's say that we'd say you live in inner city Chicago versus you live in, a really affluent neighborhood in New York, right? Right now, the government gives the school districts money based on the amount of students that are there in the situation. What Problematic Pan's saying is instead of giving that money to the schools, you give that money directly to the families of the student and say, now you get to choose where they go to school. Now, Connor talked about a problem of scarcity, right? But if we change drastically how this system occurred, then we would see competition in the market where after a few years, you would see, wow, there's an opportunity if we start a charter school in this particular area that's being ill-served, that we're going to get a big portion of that money. And so then when you have competition and you have people saying, competition like, hey, send your student to our school because we're better. We are putting out better reading scores, better math scores. Then parents will direct their kids there and the money they're getting there, which will make the schools that have the more effective administrators and more effective educators receive more money.
Why would they have to move there?
You don't have to move
there.
You
keep saying this. No, you don't have to move.
Okay, so you don't have to move, but all the parents are trying to get into one school. What is that going to do for the price of that one school? Like if it's competition based, right?
Other schools, if there's a glut,
more.
Right. The price is like you can't charge more per student or anything like that, right? Like, and again, you're going to go to a school that could be afforded based on the stipend that the government's giving you. That's already a problem in the status quo, though. For example, like if you're independently wealthy, you could pay to send your kid to a private school that charges more than the charter schools that we're talking about. But the charter schools are only going to be effective coming up in these areas if the people in those areas can afford it. So it wouldn't make sense to put a charter school in inner city Chicago to service poor Black communities in Chicago and say, we're going to charge $40,000 a year. That wouldn't make sense. Instead, they'll charge an amount that the government's sending in money per each student.
Whoa, hold on. So if nobody's going to move schools and everybody's just going to keep on going to the school that's closest to them anyway, then why do we do this?
Everybody, but a large portion are, right? One heavy consideration in what school you go to is proximity. That's always going to be a heavy consideration under school choice, under any system. Obviously, it's preferable to go to a school that's within walking distance than to bus an hour and a half to school each day, right? That's always going to be
answer, why do we see such disparate outcomes with these schools now that do get funding to like bring in disadvantaged students?
Because they don't give a shit. Because the system sucks. Because the administrators and the teachers suck. Because the environment sucks. Because we continue to see that these programs, these education programs, they keep saying, well, we need more money. We need more money. They're consistently low.
Do you understand why I'm saying that they won't get more money if it's competition based? Because parents won't want to send their kids there and it'll just stay shitty at that school and it'll keep on getting
Yes, then shitty schools will fail. Perfect. Shitty schools fail. Now those kids are going to schools that are more successful. Sounds good to me.
Going to schools that he's Jewish and also a victim. Classrooms. Holy shit.
What's that, Doobie?
I said you should maybe throw in the Spectre's Jewish and also a victim. Maybe that'll help you out.
Does he have a Jewish slur in his pronoun? Does he have a Jewish slur in his pronoun name there?
That would make it much more rhetorically effective.
Hey, it's really funny because can we say good that no schools will shut down? But God, we know how many different schools that have been like incredibly underfunded and have like persisted for decades, from like my mother's day till now, that still exists. It's not like they just shut the schools down. It's just they just keep the schools open and just expect the terrible results, and the community suffer as a result of it. That's exactly what happens.
Okay, so then give parents the option to send their kids to better schools.
Yeah, so and when we're talking about in these impoverished neighborhoods, like, so a lot of times, like a parent moving their child to a different school, it like requires like extra, like it requires extra work. Sometimes these people don't have mobility, like no transportation. We've obviously seen like we've done like things like busing, but there were some negative ramifications for that because children at this point now, like in some cases, had to spend an extra like hour like commuting to school and from like, and it's school day is already 8 hours. So then when you start talking about like 10 hours, like just for education, that like ends up getting in the way for like they have to wake up earlier, which can like disrupt their sleep. They have less time with their families. There's all sorts of other problems that come with that. So yeah, and then of course
And that's a non-unique problem.
Parental inability to respond to some of the problems that happen at school that also creates a problem as well.
Listen, we should just invest in all schools. It's not even that fucking expensive. Like seriously, like
Yes.
What do you mean we should just invest in all schools? I don't think people understand. Per pupil, we spend second most out of every country in the world besides Norway. We can't just keep clearly, we spend so much per pupil. It's got to be.
Let me tell you what I mean. Let me tell you what I mean. I made the point. He interrupted. Spectre, hold on. He fucking. I said something. He objected. I'm gonna say it again. All right. I get what the fuck you're saying, but we are the richest, most powerful fucking country. I have no idea whether or not the fucking stats that you're talking about include inflation or fucking money. If they do, awesome. But at the same time, we got endless fucking cash for stupid fucking shit, like, I don't know, the war in Afghanistan, which was fucking $50 billion a year, and universal pre-K would be $26 billion a year. So basically what I would say is that even if it's fucking expensive, we just bite the fucking bullet and we say, hey, what guys? It's fucking pennies on the dollar. It's 0.03% of the fucking federal budget. We're going to go ahead and fund universal fucking pre-K, and we're just going to eat the fucking cost because it's important to invest in the next generation so the world doesn't suck ass.
Schools are funded by state. What percentage of the state budget do you think is generally allocated towards education? What percentage?
No, I don't give a fuck. I should say the feds should fucking fund it. The state should administer it. The feds should fund it.
Okay, so it should be federal funded too? Is that,
sure, fucking school.
Okay, well, if you're going to say that, like, I mean, there's a different argument against that, but my state already spends 60% of their state income tax, or not state income tax, state tax revenue, period, on education. We can't continuously increase this. I mean, obviously,
but that's not the problem.
Listen, get good, problematic. That's what I'm saying.
No, that's not the problem. The problem isn't just the total amount of funding. The problem is that like the funding is not like equal across different like groups, right? So you'll see Black people like since like a lot of times like education is funded by property taxes, and so we can like just look at the raw number and say, look how much our state is paying towards this education. But that education, it's not equally giving that towards like the Black people. You'll find Black people in crazily overcrowded classrooms that they will have less funding for their individual classrooms, but when we average it out, then it's like, oh yeah, it's a good number. But in reality, it's just incredibly disparate.
To be clear, I agree, and that's why I want it to be based on the student, not based on the area code. What I'm just saying is that we can't increase our spending by that much because we're already spending such a large percentage of our budget on it. And for all the stuff like the war in Afghanistan and shit, I don't think we could afford that shit either. But that's another discussion.
A better solution that would fix this entire thing is if instead of us like going and saying, oh, we'll fund it off of property taxes. We can still keep the funding. We can still keep the funding off of property taxes. But what we could instead do is then like collect a pool from the entire state and then divvy out those funds depending on which per student. Right. And so then that way you guarantee even like the places that are overcrowded that they now will have better funding, and the places that don't need it as much won't have it. And it's like that would fix like these disparate levels of funding.
That's literally what we do.
That's what we're advocating for.
We don't do that. We don't.
That's what we're advocating for. Yeah.
No.
That's what I'm advocating for, at least.
That's the status quo. Again, I'll cite the studies again. Please, let me.
I don't think that's the status quo. That's the status quo.
I've cited the studies.
We don't have school
choice. Go ahead.
What state, Rob?
So let me cite the studies again, right?
Again,
2017 report from Nationwide K through 12 education.
You're not answering the question. We all heard.
I am answering the question.
You said respond. Oh my God, you gotta let him respond.
He already said that this is a response. He already read this.
What the fuck I'm talking about? Shut the fuck up.
I'm asking him what state. I don't want to hear just a random thing that he already read, that we already heard, that doesn't address this. I'm asking you what state.
That was an average of all 50 states.
But it can't be an average of all 50 words.
Why can't it? On average, in the United States, we spend K-12 education, poor students in minority neighborhoods get on average $12,961. Non-poor students in white areas traditionally get $12,640. When it comes to the taxes that go to people, in 1920, local taxes were responsible for, that's property taxes, were responsible for 83% of funding for schools. That number has lowered to 45%. State taxes, which is exactly what Fanatic is talking about, instead of just using local property tax, we should have a big pool of money from the state that then goes into these communities. That is what the status quo is. 47% of all funding comes from state sources. 8% comes from federal sources. So the status quo is property taxes pay less than 50%, and the state and federal money is going to equalize out the places that have low property taxes that aren't funding their schools that much, to the point that on average per student, kids in these inner city schools are getting paid slightly more than those not in the inner city schools. That's what Fanatic called for, and it's not solving the problem at all.
That's not what I'm asking for. So if you if you take cases like California, sure, you have a slightly higher average, right? 58% of the funding for education comes from state taxes. 32%, which is still a very significant, almost 1/3 of the education is funded by local taxes, and that deficit right there is enough to create a crazy disparity that would create these problems in the education system. Still, do you agree with that?
No, because
okay, so you just don't know how math works.
Listen, let me finish, right? Like, I'll tell you why. Because you're assuming that state money goes equally to each school. But if it's, and I don't know specifically about California, but that same thing you could say about the national numbers that I just showed. However, that's assuming that the state and federal money is equally being divvied out school to school. That's not how it happens. What happens is those state and federal dollars go to the schools that aren't getting a lot of the property tax dollars. So they end up having more money per student in the inner city schools than in the schools that aren't in the inner city. Even though, so look at it this way. Maybe you only get per student with property tax in the inner city $1,000 per student, but in the wealthier areas, you get $10,000. Well, the state and federal taxes come in and make up that glut to where we normally see per student, the inner cities get more. And there are still huge problems. Is any of us going to argue that there aren't huge problems in inner city schools?
Wait, can I get a source for that? It's not that I don't agree with you, but like I'd like a source for that. That would be really surprising. That would be extremely surprising to me.
So the other problem is that if we look and we see like California, the way California is done is that like they end up doing it by district, right? But even within district, you can have incredibly segregated areas. So yes, you can have so the funding will be equal on every single district or whatever, but then the districts themselves will start enacting these incredibly racist policies that they will overfund like the white schools and still underfund the black schools. So there's still
show me the proof. Show me the data.
So okay,
oh my God, I can find that.
All right, so why don't we give
I put the links, by the way, in the Discord.
The last point, and then we'll wrap things up. Though we can continue this on the open walk-on panel right after this. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I forgot who's making this argument, but the school system and the problem with the education system isn't a lack of funding. That is like extremely apparent. Or even if it is a lack of funding, that accounts for a very, very small percentage of the issue. The real issue is a fucking shitty curriculum. You have like problems with tenure and stuff like that. There has to be like a more holistic approach towards education. There has to be a holistic revamp of education. Otherwise, you're gonna keep on going to the same issues. If you keep throwing money at this, increasing the quantity of this shitty education will not change anything. You have to increase the quality of education.